I want to turn now to Chris Nowak, welcome him up to the stage. Chris is the Chief Transformation Officer over at Kingsman Software.
Thanks, Eric.
And Chris, boy, we've been doing business together now for 10, 12 years, something like that.
Yeah.
I know your background is 20 years of Agile and DevOps transformations at a couple of banks. You're now out consulting, sharing that more widely. What I want to start with, though, is we just heard about a great transformation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go to the executives who signed off on that? Or need to sign off on that in advance and say, look, this is going to pay dividends. There's ROI here. There's a business case. How do you have that kind of a conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's probably a couple different ways to attack it, right? And so I have the opportunity, or had the opportunity of doing it in the banks, and actually for 20 years, kind of practicing it, and now on the outside seeing even a broader scope. What's interesting is I'm seeing all the same patterns. Sometimes you start at the grassroots. You I think there's an Arthur Ashe quote out there, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but do what you can with what you have where you are. And so identify where you can get a start, okay? If you have executive support, that's great. And typically I'll try to do three things, right? So first of all, ask the question, right? Every company is going to be a little bit different. Every group is going to have certain challenges that others don't. So you have to get the lay of the land and say, well, where are your pain points, your constraints, your challenges, those sorts of things. Don't assume you know, right? Because what you do with ATMs, for example, is going to be very different than what you do at mobile. So once you find out what they think the pain points are, it may not be correct, but it's a good starting point. So the second thing is you want to baseline it and then say, well, what does DevOps really mean? We all have a different definition of it by design, I think. So I start by saying, look, when we talk about DevOps, it isn't just CI/CD. It's not just automation. And I like to use one acronym. It's pretty easy to remember. CALM, right? Culture, automation, lean process, and then measurements. I say, we really like to start with automation. That's a nice place that we all understand. But very quickly, to get the value that you want, you really need to extend it into leaning out the process or getting rid of process, changing the way, and you referenced it before, changing the way change control works. And then most importantly, how do you change the culture? Now, culture is hard to change unless you're the CEO, but you can change the behaviors, right? So we look at how do we change the behavior or align it to the goals we want, and then we put process and tooling in place to amplify the good behavior, which achieves the business outcome. So we start with that kind of a conversation so that everything we do going forward is aligned to what's important to the business of your company. The third thing is we share the data. So I usually start with something, personal, like would you like to be home at Friday at 5 instead of spending all night, releasing code and re-releasing code when you could be home having dinner or maybe coaching your son's lacrosse game or something, right? And then we have data. There's a lot of data out there now. And so, for example, and this comes out of State of DevOps reports, but there's other places where you're going to see this. If you're a highly enabled DevOps performing organization, you are twice as likely to exceed profit margins, okay? You are 50% more likely in 3 years to have a 50% higher market cap, right? So that should appeal to the business side of the equation. Look, there are real tangible benefits for doing this. You can get code from concept to cache 440 times faster. Think about the business value of that, right? Security increase or decreases by 50% security issues. So there's a lot of data out there. So you go from it's going to feel good, and the data supports how much better you're going to be as an organization. And by the way, it all goes to quality of life of the people that are doing the work. And I was interested to see you started moving from your technology chain, and you started to talk a lot about the teams and the people in the interaction. That's actually where your leverage is really going to come from, because we all have the same access to the same tools, roughly. Mostly open source. Within a degree of reason, we can afford commercial tools. We have access to the same information. You can go to YouTube and find out how do you what is lean, what is agile. So it's not that we're not, we all have access to those things. So what's the differential? It's really your culture and your people, which probably leads us into a bit more of the conversation.
Well, and the people who are doing it, I just heard they were winning in the market. I love that. So let me ask you, you mentioned a little bit about, you mentioned security, you mentioned a little bit of governance change. I know there are people out there who are, yeah, butting, right? Like, but I'm a regulated company.
Sure.
And maybe they didn't hear that you guys were both banks, and I think there's a little regulation there. Could you speak real briefly about kind of that intersection of these more modern DevOps approaches and audit and governance?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if there's anything really modern about it. It goes back to your fundamentals, right? DevOps, I mean, the word is Dev and Ops, but there's a lot more, right? There's the business on the dev side, there's security, there's audit, all these folks. So when we approach it, and in a regulated industry, it really kind of highlights what you have to do. I make audit my friend and my partner. I will seek them out to begin with and say, look, we're going to do things a different way. We're going to create the evidence earlier in the process. We're not going to throw away controls, right? We're going to show you that we can mitigate the risk and provide compensating controls in the automated process. And they actually like that because there's predictability, visibility, consistency, all these things the auditors want to see. And then frankly, their job gets easier. I actually invited them to audit when I had the platform services teams inside the banks. Come audit me, don't audit the application teams or the ops teams. Because they've all said, they've attestated that they're using our process the way it's been designed. So it's right there for them. It makes their job easier, and it isn't just the internal auditors, right? It's the OCC or whatever regulators that you're dealing with. They do like to see that. So make them your friends, bring them in. And it's the same thing with everybody else that we normally talk about, security and everybody else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a wide net. The name is DevOps, but that's because if we said it was biz, dev, QA, infra, security, blah, 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 that would be really bad branding for this term. Right. So, yeah, it's the big thing.
It is.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, thank you for sharing your experiences.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Appreciate it.